and it's about 11 o'clock at night, 11:30, and the phone goes, and I pick it up, and I go, hello? Hello, is that Nicky? I said, yeah. He said, it's David here. I said, David? David who? He said, it's David Bowie. I said, oh, fuck off, who is it? He said, Nicky, it's David Bowie. I went, oh, fuck. Oh.
Welcome to Name Drop Me Never, the podcast that actively celebrates the art of the dreaded name drop. And I'm delighted to welcome a broadcasting legend, the one and only Mr. Nicky Horne.
A legend, I think.
Well, he's got two of those, apparently. So
it's
welcome.
very nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too.
Do you want to tell our listener how we met?
Well, you can tell them if you want.
We both live in a lovely part of London called Hampstead. Actually, I'm not in Hampstead. I'm in Hampstead Garden suburb. And there's a wonderful, there was a wonderful Mama and Papa Italian restaurant and wine bar called La Gaffe. And I used to go there regularly because the pasta was like brilliant and the company was brilliant. And Basti was one of the people that I met there, along with John Moss, who is going to be on this podcast.
We were at rehearsal the other day, and I said, "Do you want to do the podcast?" He went, "No," because that's John.
Oh, he's a grumpy old.
He's a
git.
grumpy old.
Yeah,
And I said, "Well, it's
yeah.
just as well because you haven't got any social media, so you're not going to share it with anyone else." And we ended up bickering, but I'm sure he will do it.
Okay,
that's just John being John. So obviously we met a lot of people at La Gaffe. I mean, it seemed to have, like, Peter O'Toole used to go there, didn't he? He lived across the road, and
I did a film with him.
Oh, did you? Well, that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it.
Okay, I was a sort of child actor, and when I was 13, I'm very short. I'm not standing up, by the way. I am very short, and I've been short all my life.
You even had a jingle.
Yes,
your
Little
whole
Nicky
life.
Horne.
Little
Yes.
Nicky Horne, Little Nicky Horne.
My mother answered an ad in the Evening Standard, and the ad said, children under 13 wanted who had to be under 4'10". And she thought this would be good for my confidence because I used to get, bullied at school being a short ass, not something that you would ever.
Height comes with its own problems.
Yes.
But we'll move on to that.
And so the next day, I found myself at the Barbara Speake Stage School in Acton, singing "My Old Man's a Dustman." And I passed the audition to get into the stage school, or in fact to be represented by the agency in the stage school. And my agent was a wonderful woman called Mrs. Collins. And fast forward now a few weeks, and I auditioned for Oliver, the musical, in the theatre. And I auditioned for the part of the Artful Dodger. Right? I get the audition, and I start rehearsals, and I'm 13, nearly 14 now. And I start the rehearsals, and this is my story, my voice broke during the rehearsals of singing, as the Artful Dodger. And the producers went to my agent, Mrs. Collins, and said, look, this Nicky Horne, he can't do it. Also, I was crap at the dance moves. I couldn't dance. And they said to Mrs. Collins, look, we're in a bit of a hole here. Who could we get? Can you get someone else? And Mrs. Collins went, yeah, actually, I've got someone that could do it. My little boy, called Phil. Phil Collins got his first break through me.
There you go.
And we have been firm friends ever since. But to go back to Peter O'Toole, one of the gigs that she got me, Mrs. Collins, was in Goodbye, Mr. Chips, starring Peter O'Toole, and I was one of the school kids.
I'm going
And
to have
I
to look that up now and find it and watch it, because now I've got to look for
well,
Nicky Horne.
yeah, you look for me in the film.
That you got this job, and as a kid, a teenager, you're kind of waiting. I was anyway. I was waiting for my voice to break because I had a late puberty, and it was like I really want my voice to break. But then when it does, and then shit, you've lost the job because your voice
Yeah,
breaks.
but then
Yeah,
I've my voice has been my career subsequent to that, so
there you go.
I can't really complain.
No, you can't. There was some great name dropping going on there with the way Phil Collins slid in there as
Yes,
well. I thought that was great.
yeah, thank you.
So now you've famously interviewed the Beatles, haven't you? All
Hmm.
four of them, I believe.
All of them, yeah,
So
yeah.
go on, run us through it.
After they had left the Beatles, the Beatles were my first ever gig when I was 13. See, a lot happened when I was 13. My birthday was in September the 3rd, and my dad bought me a late bar mitzvah present in the December, which was 2 tickets to see the Beatles at the Rainbow Theatre.
Good present.
In fact, it wasn't the Rainbow then; it was the Finsbury Park Astoria, and it was their Christmas show. And that was the first time I'd ever been to a gig. So my first gig
Wow.
was the Beatles.
That's
And I remember distinctly just being kind of like, because you couldn't really hear anything because there were just screams everywhere. And the Beatles were only on for, I think it was about 15 minutes, because there were lots of other acts that were
well, they used to
that
have
were
like
on.
Little Richard, and they had
Yeah,
some big
yeah,
acts, didn't
and
they?
also some comedians I seem to remember, and Freddie and the Dreamers I remember, and then a few years later, I got tickets for to be in the audience for an American TV show that was being filmed in Wimbledon called Shindig, and it was the Beatles were appearing on Shindig. And I was sitting in the front of the audience, and the floor manager came up to me and said, "Look, here's a banana. I'd like you to give this banana to John Lennon when they finished their song, right? Because it was recorded, it wasn't live." And so I don't know why they probably thought it was quite funny. So I go up and I give John Lennon this banana,
It's
and
that
he just
60s thing, wasn't it? It was
yeah,
let's
yeah,
do weird things for no
yeah,
reason.
yeah,
Yeah, that was
exactly.
very much a thing. Yeah.
And well, then years after that, and I didn't remind him of the banana because he would never have remembered. I was on the air at Capital, and it was a Friday night, and Kenny Everett came into the studio. There's another name drop. Kenny came into my studio, and he went, "Darling, how would you like to go to New York and interview John?" And I went, "John who?" He said, "Lennon, silly Billy." And Everett knew Lennon through the Liverpool connection, right? So he knew them, like, in the very early days. And also Everett went on the first Beatles tour of America when he was working for Radio London, the pirate ship Radio London. So he knew the Beatles really well. And Lennon had rung Everett and said, "Look, I want to do an interview with you, and I want you to come to New York, and I want to talk about some really heavy stuff," right? And so Everett's in my studio, and he says, "Look, John wants to talk about, heavy stuff." He said, "And it's not really my bag." He said, "But I said to John, I know someone who would do it and would love it." And it was Everett who said to Lennon, "Nicky will do the interview." So a few days after that, I am on a Pan Am plane, first class, to New York. First time I'd ever been in first class.
I think
First time,
they call
first,
this living the dream,
yes,
don't they?
first time ever going to America. First time I ever had caviar. So when they used to come around with a trolley with a big sort of cauldron almost of caviar.
The glamorous days of flying. It's not
Yeah.
nearly as good as
No,
EasyJet, though,
no,
is it?
no, no speedy boarding back then.
Oh, you wouldn't need that then.
And I arrived in New York, and the next day I went to the Dakota. The Dakota is a very imposing Gothic building. You look at this building and it's like, oh my God, it's like enormous. It's got this aura about it. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. You know, I didn't want to let Everett down. I didn't know what the subject matter of the interview was because no one had told me. You know, it was secret what Lennon wanted to talk about. And I remember going up to the door. I went into the main lobby and then up to their apartment. And I remember being terrified and raising my left hand to kind of knock on the door, this big oak door. And my hand was shaking. And as my hand went up, the door opened and there was Lennon in a white t-shirt and blue jeans and the glasses, and he put his hand up and he went, "How?" So our two hands sort of met, and he said, "Come in." He said, "Yoko's not here." He said, "But he said, I knew you were coming, so I baked some cookies." He said that these aren't sort of Betty Crocker, you know, mix. This is like I've made it from scratch for you. And when I tell this story, I can actually remember the smell of those cookies in this galley kitchen. This was a huge apartment, right? And yet the kitchen was very narrow. It was a narrow galley kitchen. Two people couldn't stand side by side in it. It was so narrow. And we went into the living room with these cookies, and he made coffee, and we sat on the white shag pile carpet. The only thing of colour in the room was a brass telescope that looked out over the Hudson. Everything else was white.
So it's a bit like that, the Imagine film.
The white piano.
They got into that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Their decor, everything was white, wasn't it?
The white piano. And I sat on the carpet, cross-legged, as did he. And the normal convention is that as the interviewer, you would warm up the interviewee. That's the normal thing to do. And he realised how incredibly nervous I was, that I was kind of shaking and I couldn't really speak properly. And Lennon realised how nervous I was, and he just said, "Look, you know, we don't have to do the interview now. You know, let's just chat." And we chatted for an hour about everything, from Everett to London, to Capital Radio, to politics, everything. And then he said, okay, when he realised that I was, you know, not nervous anymore, he said, "All right, let's start." And I do remember just before we started, I looked down at the carpet and realised that I'd spilt some chocolate crumbs on this pristine white carpet.
Sure, they could afford the dry cleaning bills,
but the interview was important because he was talking about, you know, being followed by the FBI, how his phones had been tapped, how he was being surveilled. And I got back to London and people criticised me for not pushing back on these stories. You know, I just accepted what he was saying. And years later, when what the American equivalent is of the Freedom of Information came out, you know, it was confirmed. He was being followed. His phones were tapped. He was being surveilled.
Mm.
So that became an important interview.
Mm. Well, there's a whole Netflix, or is it Amazon? There's a documentary about that now
Yeah.
that's doing the rounds.
Yeah.
And yeah, he definitely was being watched. Yeah. So, what about the other three?
Okay, so George.
George.
Okay, George. I used to do this segment on a program called Thames News, which was a news program, local news program, and I did music news. And I did that once a week. And there was one time where we had an interview booked with Richard Branson. And about 2 hours before transmission, Branson rang up, or his people rang up and said, Richard can't do it. So I had this slot where I didn't have an interviewee. And so, now this sounds really name droppy.
Go for it. You have license to name drop here.
I feel like a bit of a wanker saying this.
Go on.
I actually had George Harrison's number. See, even the engineer laughs at that, right? I rang George and said, look, George, I've got this problem. I've got this, TV show, and I've got no interviewee. Would you come up? What you doing this afternoon? And he said, well, I'm just, tending my garden. He was in Henley at Friar Hall. And he said, yeah, I'll come up.
Wow.
So he drove up. I remember he drove up in his black Porsche Turbo, which he'd only just got a few weeks before, parked it outside Thames Television in Euston Road, came and did the interview. And then at the end of the interview, he said, I love this car. He said, I love this car. I said, I love it as well. He said, come for a ride. And we went for a ride on the elevated section of the Westway. And I think he touched about 90. But, that was George Harrison. I mean, and that was the kind of... And then I interviewed him several times on Capital after that.
But it's amazing that he was a stand-in. And actually he's like, I mean, you couldn't have had a bigger name.
No,
I mean,
yeah.
and it's just like, you don't mind subbing for someone
but
who's
he
never
didn't,
heard of.
The thing is, he didn't have anything to promote. There was nothing in it for him, except, probably, just doing someone a good turn.
Yeah.
And I interviewed him several times after that, and he was the closest Beatle to me. Ringo, not so much. I interviewed him once, and it wasn't a great interview. McCartney, though, and I mean, we got on like a house on fire, despite the fact that I got a phone call from his office. Remember when he got busted in Japan for drugs in his suitcase? And it was a huge story because he went to jail in Tokyo. They put him in jail. And I got a call from McCartney's office to say, can you come in because Paul wants to do an interview to talk about this. So I go there with my portable tape recorder, and we talk, and he gives a kind of mea culpa. And during the interview, I say to him something like, Paul, you got busted before, didn't you? And you go into Tokyo and you've got grass in your own bag. And these are the words I used, and I can't believe that I did this to McCartney. I said, some people might call that the height of arrogance. And he responded, but not in the way that I thought he was going to, get really angry, but he wasn't. He said, I suppose some people could see it that way. And then the interview continued, and we finished, and he was absolutely lovely. And sometime later, I was doing the American football on Channel 4, presenting the American football. And I wrote this book. And I knew that McCartney was a a fan of American football.
Oh, is he? I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Oh.
And so I got in touch with his office, again, MPL, and said, look, I've got this book coming out, would Paul write the foreword for me? And he did. And he wrote this foreword, and he sent me this picture and his signature, and it went on the foreword of my book, and it helped sell so many copies. And I actually saw him about 6 months ago. He was in St John's Wood, because that's where he's got a place. And bumped into each other, hello, how are you? Little hug. Oh, hello, you haven't grown, have you? No, I haven't, Paul.
Are you still going, hey, I'll tell you what?
Yeah. Oh.
But I've always felt that Paul McCartney is someone who he really knows how to handle his fame. He is probably, I suppose, who's the most famous person in the world? Lots of people. But, I mean, he's up there, obviously, as a legend of all legends of rock and roll music, everything. And for someone who, I mean, one of the downsides of being famous is that everyone wants to talk to you all the time, right? If you're that famous, it's impossible to just go out and sit here without someone coming up to you, like I did with George Martin, embarrassingly, like whatever, and it must become a real pain in the arse. And yet, there's a friend of mine called Robin. He was a taxi driver. He's a hippie. He lives in Hampstead, and he got friendly with Paul a bit and drove him around a little bit for a bit. And he said that people would come up to the window of the taxi and knock on the window and go, and he'd always wind down the window and say, okay. And they say, can we have a selfie and an autograph? He said, well, you can have a selfie or an autograph, but you can't have both. He's just a natural of how to cope with. I mean, he sits on trains, he goes for walks. I had a similar thing with Emma Thompson, and I bumped into her and asked her to do an interview for Hospital Radio. She said, oh, here's my home phone number, give me a call, come round. And so I ended up sitting there, and she was very pregnant at the time. And she made this funny little joke. I said, oh, God, wouldn't it be great if you had your baby now, and I delivered it on air? That would be such a coup for the Royal Free Radio, wouldn't it? And she went, don't worry, I'm sitting on a very absorbent cushion. Like that. And she was just such a laugh. I mean, she was great, and well, she still is. And she also, like Paul did with your book, she wrote a little bit on the back. Actually, this is, well, why don't I plug my first book, not this one, The Joy of Addiction, Confessions of a Teenage Wastrel. And she wrote on the back, and I bumped into her in Flask Walk. And I said, could you, I don't suppose I've got a book out. I don't suppose you could write something for it. She was, look, I'm in a bit of a hurry, Sebastian. Call my PA. So I sent an email to the PA, and I thought she'd fob me off. But her being her, I thought, well, no, she hasn't, because that's not her style. So I wrote to the PA, and she came back with, like this, its author, this is funny, honest, and in your face, a great and enlightening and helpful read. Anyone who thinks I only drink on weekends makes them less of an addict. I include myself in that category, Emma Thompson, and said, you can put that on the back of the book. And I thought, wow, how nice to give that to an unknown independent author who's a nobody, lanky streak of piss running a little magazine.
Oh, don't be so hard on yourself.
Well, I mean, I'm probably a wild W lister, you know what I mean? I'm hardly I've never been on a red carpet in my life. I don't even have a Wikipedia page. So I'm definitely not famous. And I wear it as a badge of honour in a way. But anyway, but similarly to Paul, or George coming and doing that thing for you, when someone's had so much success and they are at the top of their game, and they go, do you know what? I'm going to come and give this person something. And it reminds me a bit of that stuff I've learned in recovery, that we keep what we have by giving it away, and it's a nice thing.
Yes.
A sort of counterintuitive, nice thing, just to give unconditionally sometimes, which you are here today.
Yes, indeed.
I know I'm giving you £1 million for this interview, but you got a double espresso, mate.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? Yeah, and it was very good too.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
So anyway, let's carry on with the name dropping, since we're doing so well. David Bowie.
Yes, David Bowie.
There's a name drop.
Yes. Okay, so we first met at Top of the Pops when I was working for Radio 1 as a humble interviewer, being paid £7 7 and 6 for every interview that went on the air.
that's probably actually more or about the same as the cost of that double espresso today.
Yes, yes. Um, and I went to Top of the Pops when David Bowie did that famous performance of Starman, which became iconic because of the kind of well, I mean, he was with Mick Ronson. Mick was dressed in this gold, it looked like Baco foil jumpsuit, and Bowie with this incredible makeup and purple hair, I seem to remember. And he just, there was one point in that video where David Hepworth, the venerable music journalist, said this was the point that David Bowie actually became a superstar, when he pointed to the camera on the lines, and I had to call someone, so I picked on you. And he pointed at the camera like that. And I was in the control room, and Stanley Dorfman, director, who'd seen like so many different bands. When Bowie did that, even Dorfman went, wow. I mean, audibly, wow. That was, and I did the interview with him, with Bowie and with Ronson that day. And then we kind of, I think, someone said to me the other day, a producer at the Beeb said that I interviewed David Bowie more than anyone else in the world, apparently.
Well,
More times than anyone else. There was a time when I made a huge, stupid error where I was on the air at Capitol and I'd been invited to go to Toronto to interview Bowie on, can't remember which tour it was, but it was one of those early tours. And I made this ridiculously stupid child-like schoolboy error, which was I went on the air on the Friday and I said, and guess where I'm going at the weekend? I'm going to Toronto to interview David Bowie. And I'll be back next week exclusively on Capitol with this interview, right? So I go to Toronto with the head of RCA Promotions. We go to Toronto, and the idea is that we would, recover that night, go and see the gig the next day, and then interview Bowie. Long story short, the interview didn't happen. We tried several times over several days, and each time his PA said he's not going to do the interview today, but he'll do it tomorrow. So we stayed and we stayed, and then they said, look, we're going to Seattle tomorrow. Fly to Seattle. So we flew to Seattle with the roadies, not with Bowie. He took a different plane. And we went to Seattle and we didn't get the interview. I came back to London and I had to go on the air and say, I didn't get that interview.
It reminds me of a scene in Glengarry Glen Ross when Al Pacino turns to Kevin Spacey and says, you never open your mouth until you know what the shot is.
Yes. Yeah. Well, my boss at the time, he was very close to suspending me. I got into deep shit with him because, I was stupid and I said something that I shouldn't have done. I should have waited until I got the interview, as you said. And Aidan Day, his name was, Aidan got really pissed off with me and said, you brought the station into disrepute. There was a lot of press, negative press. Anyway, about 4 weeks later, I'm at home in Oxshott and I'm in bed with Mrs. H, and it's about 11 o'clock at night, 11:30, and the phone goes, and I pick it up. And I go, hello, hello, is that Nicky? I said, yeah. He said, it's David here. I said, David? David who? It's David Bowie. I said, "Oh, fuck off. Who is it?" He said, "Nicky, it's David Bowie." I went, "Oh, fuck. Oh. Hello, David. How are you?" I'm fine. He said, "Look, I heard that you got into deep shit about me." He said, "And I'm really, really sorry." He said that the truth of the matter is, he said, I was really strung out on heroin, and all I could do was the shows, and I just couldn't speak to any. So I said, "Look, I promise you that when I'm next in London, I will come and give you an exclusive interview on Capital." Lo and behold, a couple of months later, I get a call from RCA, say, "Bowie's in town. He wants to come in tonight. Tomorrow night. Tomorrow night." I didn't say anything on the air that night because I didn't want to tempt fate. But the following day, he turned up, and he turned up with this huge poster in a frame with his signature on it, "To Nicky.
Wow.
I'm so sorry. Lots of love, David. Kiss, kiss." And it was just the Gigolo poster with his signature on it. And,
I take it you still got the poster.
It's in a vault with a few other things. And he gave me the most amazing interview. We did a couple of interviews after that. There was one where he commissioned me to do an interview for him and for RCA on, I can't remember which album. Low. It was on Low. And he wanted this interview produced so that RCA could then send it round to all the English-speaking radio stations around the world so that they could have an interview with David Bowie, but he didn't have to go there. A lot of artists did that. And I remember, producing the interview at Tony Visconti's studio in Dean Street with Bowie and Visconti sitting on the sofa behind me on the desk, and I've got 3 quarter-inch tape machines going, having done the interviews and all that, and I'm piecing together this program, this interview show. And I looked round at one point, and I saw sort of Bowie and Visconti kind of looking at me like, I can see what he's doing now, because putting together a radio program was, they had no idea how it was done, and that was like unbelievably surreal.
Teaching them how it's done.
I mean, the one thing that I want to say actually is that when I tell these stories, it never ceases to kind of cross my mind how fortunate I have been to be in that and this position. I was incredibly lucky to be where I was at the time that I was, and I never forget that. I know it sounds like, I've done some incredible things, and I've met some amazing people, and I have been very, very fortunate. And I just want to say that I tell these stories, and it's kind of, there's a part of me that is kind of humbled by it. Can I tell you one little story about another story about David Bowie?
Oh, please do.
Okay.
But Bowie's, I'm a massive Bowie fan, so
Okay.
all day.
So his publicity person was a wonderful woman called Barbara DeWitt. And Barbara and her husband invited me and my then wife, who I, by the way, now call Plaintiff, invited us to holiday with them on Martha's Vineyard, outside Boston. And so we went, and it was very nice. It was a private beach and a wonderful house. And David Bowie turned up. I had no idea that Bowie was going to turn up. And Bowie suggested, I think it was No, actually, it was Barbara who suggested that we all went skinny dipping.
A quick shout out to our sponsors, Little Alexander's, a fantastic hassle-free storage service. I can highly recommend them because they were a real lifesaver when I was leaving the country and I needed to store all my stuff somewhere. It's all door to door, so you don't have to travel or pack or go to storage units in the middle of nowhere. I just booked online, a polite team turned up on time, packed everything and took it away. A few months later, it all came back to my door in perfect condition. If you're in London and need to free up space, whether you're moving, renovating or going abroad for work, this really is the easiest, hassle-free option. Little Alexander's offers flexible plans, full insurance and a properly first-class service. If you want an award-winning storage service without any stress whatsoever, head to www.littlealexanders.co.uk and Little Alexander's will collect, store and return your things while you get on with your life.
And Bowie suggested, it was Barbara who suggested that we all went skinny dipping. Now, I was a bit reluctant to do this, but the then Mrs. H, plaintiff, was really quite keen and started kind of taking off her, bikini. And I thought,
How old were you all at this time?
I was about 30.
Right, okay, so
Yeah.
reasonably young and virile.
And so Bowie stripped off. I stripped off, but Barbara and her husband did. And plaintiff, I remember, took one look at me and one look at Bowie, and we were divorced about 6 months later. True story.
I've got skinny dipping stories, but not with that. I mean, just to have gone skinny dipping with David Bowie is where do you go from that?
Yeah.
Nudity. It's not a very British thing, is it?
No.
Never mind, eh?
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah,
Stiff.
Yeah, no stiffies involved in this conversation. So anyway, moving swiftly on. I don't know where we're going here. We've got lost somewhere along the way, viewers.
I'm Nicky Horne.
Nicky Horne. He's got the horn. Oh, Pete and Dad. Do you remember Peter Cook?
Yeah.
Did you meet Peter Cook a lot in Hampstead back in the day?
No, but I did meet Dudley Moore.
Ah, there you go. I met Peter Cook at Hampstead Food Hall, and he showed me how to open a cellophane bag that I was struggling with. Funnily enough, he'd been on the radio talking about that the day before.
I'd love to have met him.
Oh, he was great.
I loved his humour.
Yeah.
Pete and Dud were amazing. Dudley was lovely, actually. He was a really lovely guy. I met him at LWT years and years ago, but it was a fleeting meeting.
Fleeting meetings are all right, but in the world of the name drop, there are no rules. So we'll continue with the last couple of little name drops. Then I've got the Eagles, Bob Dylan, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and Van Morrison, to name but a few. Is there any one of those that sticks out particularly, or anything else?
Well, I was on the road with Led Zeppelin on what became their last American tour, and I flew with them in their private jet.
Oh, nice!
Which was
bit of a party,
amazing.
Was it?
It was a bit of a party. Yes, there was. Yes, I had a gun pulled on me.
You see, people had fun in those days. They had guns pulled on them.
That tour. Yeah,
really?
I had a gun
Seriously?
pulled, by one of their security people.
Jesus.
Because I didn't have the right pass in the hotel, and I got there late at night, and this guy was at the end of the corridor as I came out the lift, and he kind of looked and saw I didn't have a pass and sort of pointed a gun. I will finish with one of the worst interviews I ever did.
Great. We do like a cringe.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, this is cringe. So, you know Harvey Goldsmith?
Yes.
Harvey Goldsmith,
famous
like the famous promoter,
Yep.
right? Harvey also managed, at one point, Van Morrison. So Harvey rang me and said, look, Van loves your show. He said he listens to it every time he's in London, and he loves your show. He'd love to come and do your show. So I said, Van is like my hero of all time. That would be brilliant. So the day arrives, and I go downstairs. We had a kind of Busby Berkeley staircase at Capitol, wide winding staircase. And I came down to the reception, and Van was there. And I put my hand out, and I'm so pleased, Hi, Van, it's nice to see you. He went, who are you? I said, I'm Nicky Horne. Who? So obviously he didn't know who the fuck I was, and also didn't know about the programme. He was also off his head. So we go up into the studio, and this is live, and he takes calls and I get calls coming in from listeners, and I'm asking him questions. He doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to be there. He's rude to the people on the phone. And I just went, Van, this was on mic, Van, why are you here? And he said, well, I'm here because my manager told me to be here. And I'm here to promote my album. I said, but you're not being very nice, so you're not answering any of these questions. I think that we're going to have to stop the interview. Van Morrison, thank you and good night. And he left. The interview was so bad. This is in the days of bootlegs. Within a week, it had been made into a bootleg and was being advertised in the small ads on NME, Nicky Horne's worst ever interview with Van Morrison. But there is a sort of postscript to that story. Harvey Goldsmith rang up and said, look, I'm really, really sorry. He said, come and have supper with me and I'll explain. And I went and had supper with Harvey, and he told me the story that in the afternoon of the interview, Van was supposed to go to Radio 1 first and do an interview with Kid Jensen and then come to me. And the Montcalm Hotel, some of the rooms are duplex, so there's like a spiral staircase up into the bedroom, and then the living room is downstairs. And Harvey went into his room, and there was no Van, right? And he went upstairs, and there was no Van. He rang downstairs to reception and said, is Mr. Morrison gone out? They went, no, he's in his room. And Harvey went upstairs again, and there was Van on the balcony threatening to throw himself off. Now, whether that was the prospect of doing an interview with me, I don't know. But they got Dr. Robert, the Dr. Robert.
Ring my friend, I said you'd call.
Right, exactly. They got the Dr. Robert to bring Van back in. They took him then to Radio 1 to do this recorded interview with Kid Jensen. And Kid, like me, was like, Van is my hero, our hero. And Van was so horrible to Jensen. And Jensen tells the story about how he actually cried because Van was so awful to him. And then he came to me, of course, and the interview didn't really happen.
From what I've heard, you're not the first person to report back that Van Morrison was not particularly a friendly person to have a chat with.
No.
And that is something that it happens sometimes, and it's odd, isn't it? It's that whole. It's not quite like separating your Wagner music from the man, or your Gary Glitter from the music, or your whatever. But sometimes an utter twat can come out with something quite good.
I think actually that it's his music is the only way that he can express himself.
His music's marvelous.
Yes, and it's sometimes it's a meditation. And it has a wonderful sort of spirituality about it, and a warmth, and an empathy, and everything that he hasn't.
Well, I was saying to Matthew Wright earlier that it was one of those things that sometimes you meet someone you've seen. Don't meet your heroes. You've met them you've seen them on TV, or you've heard them, and you really like them. You think, God, that would be so nice to meet that person. They're so nice, and then plonk.
Yeah.
It's just doesn't work out that way, for whatever reason. Sometimes people have bad days. Sometimes people just don't get on. The chemistry doesn't work, or whatever it is. Or sometimes, I think 5% of the human race are just arseholes.
Yes.
What can you do?
Which is a good point, good way to finish.
Yes, we shall finish on 5% of the human race.
5% of the human race are
arseholes. You heard it
and
here.
It's been lovely.
It's
Thank
official.
You so much.
Thank you
so much.
Mr. Nicky
Yes,
Horne.
yeah,
It's
thank
been
you.
a real pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening. Name Drop Me Never, the book featuring Nicky Horne, my little moments with him, and also that John Lennon interview as well. Is because you did that there. Do you want some royalties?
No.
Good, because we're not earning a lot of money out of this.
It's
book.
fine.
Okay, good. I'm so glad you said that.
But you can buy me an espresso.
I'll buy another espresso.
Yeah.
Nick, thanks so much for coming along. It's
You're
been a real
welcome.
pleasure. And tune in for the next Name Drop Me Never.